We function in an economy where, the younger generation know that they're going to have 5, 6, 7 jobs across their career spans. What would you tell someone about the advantages or disadvantages of these kinds of career pivots?
I tell a lot of kids, like my nephew, he wants to look at an internship, and I said, why don't you go and work in NGO in the middle of nowhere, doing something? Why do you want to do banking? Even though you're doing business management.
So I still think young people should have goals. But if the goal doesn't work out for you, as in you didn't get into medicine, you cannot fall apart. So it's also our responsibility, show them role models that have taken zigzag paths, right? So you can be a chef and you can do math, and then you can go to banking, and you can also, if you really want later in life, start your own organization early or late.
So the early days were not easy. They were full of hurdles like anything you start out on. So what was some of the big hurdles you faced and how did you overcome them?
We lost a big chunk of our money in the 2001 dot-com bust. And we had started very much with raising a fund, wanting to support organizations. And so I think with the loss of funding comes the loss of letting go people, right? Then pivot and say, okay, we're going to still stay true to mission, but how are you going to be able to do that without having sort of stable funding? I think that's really where you build resilience. You kind of try to make ends meet, and that's where you got to have hustle. You got to go out and continue to raise money.
Welcome to The Circle, a space where stories unfold, perspective meet, and conversations feel like coming home. I'm Gayatri Rangachari Shah.
And I'm Jaya Mehrotra. Each week we dive into things that move us, shape us, and connect us, from wellness to wisdom to work and womanhood.
And whether it's a soul-deep chat, a surprising insight, or simply a moment of stillness, we're here to hold that space with you.
So settle in. You're in the circle now, and this is just the beginning.
Our first guest today is someone who truly walks the talk when it comes to sustainability and social impact. Vijaya Pastala is a trailblazer, a seasoned CEO and social entrepreneur who's reshaped how we look at rural livelihoods and community-based agriculture in India. She is the founder and CEO of Under the Mango Tree, India's first single-origin honey brand. Our next guest today is Neera Nundy, a driving force behind one of India's most transformative philanthropic movements, Dasra. As co-founder and partner, Neera has been reshaping the landscape of giving in India since 1999. What began as a venture philanthropy fund has grown into a dynamic ecosystem, unlocking over $350 million in funding, supporting more than 1,500 NGOs and impacting over 180 million lives. Vijay, I'd like to take you back and rewind the clock a little bit. You were a South Bombay child, and you said that you were always exposed to rural India. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So technically not always a South Bombay kid.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up in a really small town in Karnataka called Shah, so it is a company town, where you actually walk through Jawari fields. And I used to go shooting, so wrong thing to say here, but with my dad, but when, one could shoot ducks and deer and blah, blah. So got exposed to that kind of life. And I come from a mixed heritage. So I've come from a Eurasian heritage. Always did not really know, when you are questioned about what caste you are, where's your hometown, never really had an idea. So
your mother was, your father was
is
yeah.
Eurasian.
Okay.
And my father is Andhra.
Okay.
So we just grew up confused. And after I finished Cathedral, 12th standard, I actually took a gap year. So 1984. And I traveled because I really wanted to understand what India was about. And since then, I've actually invested time in understanding. Like when I went to Manholik, I wanted to, do South Asian studies. But so I traveled as a hippie in 1984 when there was no
internet.
There was no internet.
No cell phone.
There was no what they call STD booths, and my parents allowed me to go, and the only thing was that I had to go to a post office and send them a telegram about where I was.
And how frequently would you have to do that?
I did that, I think, every new town. So I traveled 6 months, second class, and it was just like, I just got exposed to India. It was like one of the best things. One of the best things.
My God, and I'm sure required a lot of courage and gumption. How old were you?
You know, now as a mother, you think about it. But at that time, I think it was really, I mean, I think touch wood there was no scare. There was no scare.
So after that, of course, you studied international relations at Mount Holyoke College and earned a master's in regional planning at MIT. What was your dream then? You said that you have this overriding passion for India. What did you think those degrees where did you think you would go with that?
So I knew I wanted to come back. So that was, given. And then when I was in Washington, D.C., I was working at the World Bank. And then when the earthquake happened in Latur, I got the opportunity to come back on a USAID funded project. And that's how I came back. I always knew I was going to come back. I didn't know when it would be.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know when it would be.
Yeah. Neera, over to you, and let's start in the beginning for you. You were born to engineering parents in Canada, raised in Bangalore. It's different worlds, right? And how did this different worlds shape your worldview? And was academia your natural choice or something that you kind of had to go into?
So I should clarify, I wasn't really raised in Bangalore. I was sent to boarding school in Bangalore when I was 10 years old, only for 3 years. And my parents said they were sending me so I would learn about like the culture and feel a sense of belonging and have some clarity in my identity. And kind of to what Vijay was saying, I think that we've lived a bit without belonging anywhere, but I think that exposure in retrospect, although they said they were sending it for me to understand my culture, I think they were sending me because I was 10. It's way easier to not have to raise kids when they're 10 to 13 in those critical years. So I think it was that now that I have my own kids. But I feel that has now in retrospect shaped me, but at the time, I absolutely loved it. I mean, those were the days we all read Enid Blyton. It was a boarding school with girls. I was in a dorm with girls. I just thought I was on top of the world in those years. Academia, yes. I mean, my parents both went to IIT Kharagpur. My mom was the first woman electrical engineer in Kharagpur. So when they immigrated, we were very much a middle-class Indian family for which studies, doing well in school, was an expectation. So both my sister and I absolutely had to do, if not engineering, then science or math. So.
Wow. It's interesting that they both talked about this belonging. I know, Jaya, you're an army kid, and my father was a diplomat, and having to move all the time, whether it was within India or outside of India, also makes you wonder and question your belonging.
Yeah.
And in my case, my parents were from two opposite sides of India, extreme north and extreme south. So I never knew what I was, and never had like a language also that I could identify with. And so this thread is very interesting for all of us.
As an army kid, I was raised all over the country, from cities like Mathura, Udhampur, and Hyderabad. So when somebody asks me, where are you from? I'll say, I'm from Agra, but I spent only like once in 2 years, 15 days with my grandparents in that city. So I don't know much about Agra, but if you ask me about Udhampur, I know everything.
But we take that for, I think when you're younger, you feel slightly a complex about it.
Yeah, right.
But you don't recognize that actually it's an advantage because you don't belong. You don't have to play by particular norms and rules. But at that time, you feel tremendously uncomfortable and you're like, I really wish I belonged. Only later that was a privilege that you didn't really.
Yeah,
absolutely. It gives you adaptability, agility in a way, nothing else. And you can walk into strange rooms and have a conversation anytime. Yeah, and absolutely. I totally agree with you.
And actually, that's a good segue to asking you, Vijay. You worked at a number of multilateral organizations, whether it was the World Bank that you talked about, USAID when you came back to India, the Aga Khan Foundation, etc. How come you didn't? Because for a lot of people from the outside, that seems like quite a good set career path and fairly cushy, etc. But you chose not to stay within that. Could you tell us why?
On second thoughts now, I'm like thinking, why didn't I stay through that? Because that's also, that was a much more, a given road, and your bank balance is better with that. Yeah.
And more straight road. It was a more straight road. This is a more curvaceous road for you.
Yeah. But what was the question?
The question was, why did you choose not to do that?
Why did you get out of it?
Where did you, what pushed you to start something, to build something on your own?
I think the move towards entrepreneurship. So a couple of things happened. So one, I became a mom late in life. I'm the high risk. In Delhi, especially when I was living in Delhi, I was like high risk. And work was plateauing. So work was really, I would get up in a hotel and I would not remember where I was, because all hotels look the same, right?
Yeah, Delhi hotels, yes, all look the same.
And then not Delhi, just general. Yeah. And I was working in Tripura, Indonesia, Himachal.
So you're crisscrossing and traveling a lot.
Yeah, and I used to come back to Bombay, leave Johan with mummy, and then go somewhere else. And but work was actually really a plateau, and the excitement one was facing with one was feeling with being a new mom, and not getting it at work. And then when I was in Himachal. When I saw the work of bees, in an apple orchard, and it was such a simple idea, and nobody was doing it. So it was like, so there was no catalytic moment. It was just like, oh my God, this is such a simple idea. It will make such a big impact for the people, because I used to work in rural development. And so, why not do it? So that was literally how it kind of started, and I think it all came together. So it's like the jigsaw puzzle kind of formed, because it was what I was going through as a woman, the ecosystem of my career, and then the fact that this was such an easy, it was such a simple idea. Yeah. And
could you just tell us in a nutshell what the idea was?
So basically, the idea is facilitation of pollination. So, when farmers are on the farm, you have better seeds, better fertilizer, better irrigation. They put all their love and money and energy into making the farm
thrive,
hopefully successful. But then when the flower comes into bloom, nobody does anything. Right? You wait for God and for pollinators to happen. But what this is where you put one bee box on a farm. Bees only roam 2 kilometers from their hive. And in one bee box, you have between 30 to 60,000 bees. So actually what you're doing is that if you have 100 flowers, normally you would have about 10 to 15 flowers that get pollinated. And now it's even worse, because now bees are declining and pollinators are declining. But if you have a box of bees, imagine you have 100 flowers, all the flowers get pollinated. So the impact on the harvest is and the income of that farmer. So simple idea.
Which you have tracked that data. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. And Neera, for you, your exposure in grassroots India started with your mom's school for Adivasi kids in Kharagpur. How did that early childhood influence who you've become today?
So I think there are a lot of different things that influence us in our childhood, that it's all in retrospect. So I would say that I grew up in Canada. I never imagined in a million years I would come back to India, despite having done boarding school. So there were a few places with which I did have a reconnection with India. It was boarding school. Then my summers in college, I came and worked for an investment bank here in Bombay on my own. And then my mom started the school because IIT Kharagpur gave her some land to start a boarding school actually, for children who were in adjoint villages. So basically it was kind of a contrast to have IIT, such elite education, in some ways privilege, and on the other side of the railway tracks have kids who didn't even have government schools. So my mom said, let's use the land that IIT's given to kind of start this school. And I I didn't know any better. I was like, oh, well, I'll come in the summers and come and see it. But I think that's really where, see, we live very privileged lives in India, right? You could be in South Bombay and never see anything, frankly, in the rest of India. So I think even though I made trips and came to India, it was the first time I saw rural India. And this was deep levels of poverty in West Bengal that many people don't see, that you get exposure to. And I think that kind of shaped more for me to know that these kinds of communities exist in the country, and actually this is how they live. To be honest, this was the time that microfinance actually just started picking up. And that was also a time where I started moving into working in investment banks. So kind of the combination of my mom running the school, going back and forth, doing simple things like trying to teach English, trying to teach math, but connecting it back to other things that I was being exposed to, I would say all of that kind of shaped me.
And did your education, because you went to Harvard Business School, did you think that when you were at business school that you would pursue something in sort of that would try to combine the exposure that you had from, coming and visiting the school in rural India, plus your investment banking background? Did you think you'd marry those two?
No, I didn't actually have that much foresight at all. I mean, I wanted to be a doctor. I thought the only thing you could do was to be in medicine, and everybody at that time in the US and Canada, Indians were all trying to be doctors at that time. So I thought I was going to go to medical school, and that was the only way. And then I started doing math, and then I was like, wow, there's this thing called business. It's so easy. You put your hand up, 60% is participation for your grade, unlike what math was. So I was like, oh, this seems way easier. And at that time, they were really trying to encourage women to come into Wall Street, come into, the likes of a Morgan Stanley or Goldman. So I got in and then, went there, and never thought that my exposure to Wall Street or being in banking would actually try and do anything on the impact side. That being said, now listening to Vijaya, my application to Harvard Business School was about working at the World Bank. I thought it was the IMFs and the World Bank that were gonna change the world, because that combination of big money for deep investments around infrastructure is where you build countries and economic growth. And it was only starting to get exposed to these other pieces, microfinance, what's happening in the village, that I thought, wait a second, there's something else that could be done.
Right.
I think that's so. I mean, can we?
Yeah, of course.
Get in.
No, and she's actually really right, because I think so MIT, we were like a feeder to the bank. So it was just all the professors were consultants to the bank. We did all the work for their consultancy projects, and the whole conversation was exactly this: it's better to go into these big bilateral organizations where you can then tweak. And you will have the power of tweaking, because you already, you are pro community and pro sustainable, and sustainability was just coming out at that time. The conversation.
I remember a speech that Ravi Thakran, who is got his own private equity firm and is a well-known he worked at L Capital, which is owned by LVMH, and he made this speech at this Business of Fashion Voices conference that I was at last year, where he spoke about how the World Bank had tried for so many decades to lift people out of poverty. But in fact, if you look at what China has done, and subsequently, of course, now India, when they went in for their economic reforms, the number of people who have come out of poverty in China in the 21st century alone, in the last 25 years, is exponential, a job that the World Bank would never have been able to do. So I can imagine, at some point, your frustration with being at some of these large organizations that are tweaking.
Yeah.
So
Neera, from Morgan Stanley to the Bombay slums, that's a hard pivot and a big pivot. And what influenced you to make this pivot, and what kind of purpose drove you to this?
When you say it like that, it sounds very dramatic. To be honest, it sounds way more glamorous or whatever it was. I wasn't giving up a whole lot. I was 24, whatever. When I graduated from business school, I was 27. So one's not you feel maybe that it might be kind of dramatic, and I'm sure there's folks who think at that age it's like so traumatic or dramatic to make these big shifts, but it didn't feel so drastic. But I have to be honest, what gave me a lot of confidence, which is kind of sad in some ways in retrospect, is because I got into Harvard, right? And I spent some time in New York. It gave me a huge amount of self-confidence. Basically that I could do whatever I wanted, and if it didn't work out, someone will hire me. See, for me, it was all about, can I have a job? I wanted a salaried job, and it sounds so trivial. I wanted to wear nice suits. I wanted to be able to buy brand name suits was like an aspiration. It's embarrassing that I'm saying this.
No, it's it's a good aspiration.
So I was like, check the box, Morgan Stanley. I can have nice suits, and I'm making 6 figures more than my parents ever made. So you're also left with like, okay, now what? And it's also a timing thing. I think at that time, people started to encourage shifts that were not, the straight line. Everybody from investment banking would go into a private equity fund, or you would go to business school. I was like, private equity fund seems like whatever. Oh, let me try business school. Oh, I got in. Oh, shit, I better go if I got in. Yeah. But to be honest, it was a combination of that. But I also met another analyst who then ended up being my husband. And we both actually came up with this idea of Dasra. So I have to admit that there was something about the two of us doing this together that did inspire me after business school to say like, oh, let's give it a shot. It looks like he's making a difference. Why don't we do this together?
One thing is that everyone at this table is of a particular generation, and all of us knew that it was very important for us to stand on our own feet. We were educated women, obviously came from a place of privilege, but also needed that paycheck and job security in order to be able to, have a life. But it's interesting because I think everyone here has pivoted. What would you tell, today we function in an economy where, the younger generation know that they're going to have 5, 6, 7 jobs across their career spans, which I think we grew up in a very different kind of environment. What would you tell someone about the advantages or disadvantages of these kinds of career pivots and these big changes that you think at the time are not big changes, but actually can really impact your life?
If I looked at a resume and I saw a resume, so I had a colleague who I hired, and her resume was that she came from engineering. She was from a Gujarati, traditional Gujarati family, went to France for her master's. Then she went to teach theater. And then she applied for another very banking job. And then she came to me. And for me, that constant change of doing different things showed adaptability, right? And especially when you're working in entrepreneurship. I tell a lot of kids, like my nephew, he wants to look at an internship. And I said, why don't you go and work in a NGO in the middle of nowhere, doing something? Why do you want to do banking? Even though you're doing business management, because you can do this. It's the same kind of, the principles are the same of business management and working with an NGO. Because you're looking at efficiency, you're looking at effectiveness, you're looking at disbursements, you're doing a lot of those you're looking at data. So if you look at it, it's the challenge. Right. You have to be able to challenge yourself. And, that will help. I think that's most important. I think the kids have to be allowed to challenge, allowed to fail. I think we're not given enough time to, I think as parents, I know myself, you don't allow your kid to fail. You want to be like you have to do the 10th standard, you have to do the 12th, those kind of things.
Right.
I just want to add to what you said, while you write, but I think these two careers require such different motivation and different purposes, right? What a banking career needs versus an NGO career needs. There's a lot of overcoming of obstacles. See, in the banking career, things are really laid out, processes are laid out. In an NGO career, a lot of, you have to be very
not
self-driven.
Not just NGO, but I think it could be
social impact or any entrepreneurship.
Or even chefs or anybody.
Yeah, it requires a lot of self-motivation, self-direction, and execution that comes from a lot of rigor that you've developed in life. So I would say that it's not as easy a pivot or an as easy a choice. Means I've done same pivot myself now. We're running a social impact company, and I know the kind of means I'm sure Gayatri and me, with all the privilege that we came from, are not used to the rejection and no's we've heard in the last 6 months, and it was shocking.
That's okay. Journalists are constantly being rejected.
Yes. So I would just like to know that, while these pivots look like natural pivots, but they come with some hard choices.
I don't know if they're not natural pivots. I also don't think there is a significant difference. It's the perception, how society sees banking and how society sees doing NGO impact work is different. And we play that on ourselves when you make those pivots. And so I guess, banking's not easy. Right? And it's not that structured. In fact, I would say it was even harder when you're a woman, at least in those days, to be in banking. And so it's certain life skills, like to Vijaya's example, it's life skills that are more and more important. And they're universal set of skills that, irrespective of what company or what sector you're in, leadership is looking for these life skills, and those are like resilience, hustle, adaptability, analytical skills, and some competencies are universal that people need and kids need, and that's about exposure. So the more you protect your children, the less they're going to be exposed to things. So I think exposure, getting them into different communities, sectors, that's the zigzag path that we should encourage from younger days, and that therefore gets easier when you're older. But I do think people should have goals. I don't believe that it's about a free spirit, whatever you feel like doing, you kind of do, and then we all support our children in those free spirits. I still think young people should have goals. But if the goal doesn't work out for you, as in you didn't get into medicine, you cannot fall apart, right? You don't get into an Ivy League school and you thought that was going to be your dream. It's not the end of the world. So it's also our responsibility, show them role models that have taken zigzag paths, right? So you can be a chef and you can do math and then you can go to banking, and you can also, if you really want later in life, start your own organization early or late. So I think that exposure is really important.
And I think this is the ecosystem, right? It's also the ecosystem. As an individual, like my parents always allowed me to do things.
And you use this word allowed a lot of times, and I love it. And a lot of our generation needed permission from our parents to do things. And that's not how the current generation would think. I can just turn the camera around, and if I use the word allowed to them, they will actually rebel against that word. Who's going to allow me? I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do. And I think that's
I think in certain stratas of society, yes, Jaya, but not always. But I think you're right, because it is true that we did seek our parents' approval.
But I think hugely cultural. Yes. What Indian parents don't, part of the religion insists on parents are your God. Right. That's a little extreme in my opinion, but there's a lot of respect for what parents provide for you. So I do think that there is a universal cultural aspect that plays into
But
this.
I think Jaya's point is that
young people are somehow rebels.
No, it's reducing.
And also I think the permission is no more external, it's more internal. What permissions are you willing to take for yourself and the choices you're willing to make? So I think somewhere, at least for me in the last 10 years, I have stopped taking external permissions, but choosing to have internal allowance and permission. I don't care a damn who allows me.
And so the question to ask is, what enables you to do that? Because for us as women, there's very few women, it's challenging. And so what gave you that courage, that irrespective of your parents saying, no, you can't work, mobility being a real challenge to get around, safety being issues, you're still like, I will do this for myself. I think we don't ask enough what enables that. Like, what enabled that for you?
No, and it's also, I think exposure is, I was just thinking, I was 11 when my mother sent me to my you went to boarding. So my mother, I used to run away from home. So when I was 11 years old. Wow. So I would run away from home. So my mother sent me to my grandmother in Berlin. And my grandmom, because she's, she's German. So it was like, she's like...
Cracking the whip.
Yeah, she used to do that. So, I was really kept tightly. But I spent 1 year in a new city, new country, new language. And it was, I mean, I think those are the small steps that help you on.
So I agree. A part of
yeah.
it is exposure, but part of it is doing the work of self-worth and self-esteem. A lot of us look at the world to provide us the worth that we want. And I think for me in the last 10, 15 years, the self-worth became more
Jaya,
internal.
I think that comes with maturity and age. Because obviously when you're younger, to your point, you want a sense of belonging, you want approval, you want everything. You know, you don't have that inner sense of self in a way to be able to say, this is me, I don't care if my hair is purple, pink, whatever. I mean, this is who I'm going to be. I think that comes with time. And I think especially so for women, because we are conditioned, maybe it's true for men too, but I can speak from the female point of view, is that we are so conditioned to require external validation throughout our lives.
External validation, approval, permission.
And I think it's only over time, and maybe it takes you till your 40s or early 50s or something like that, where you're like, and that's why you're seeing all these Instagram reels of menopausal women who are like, I don't care, and all this stuff, because I think it's true. Something happens to us internally. We're like, okay, you know what, enough is enough, and now this is who I am. Take it or leave it.
Yeah, so I've seen cases where women are separating or divorcing after 50 because what they thought their marriage would provide, or the approvals they were seeking, they stopped seeking, and they just had a complete pivot to their entire life, not career pivot, and career pivot to their entire life. So many women I've seen who've gone through divorce in their 50s.
Please tell us and the audience, Vijaya, about what is the Under the Mango Tree, and you had made a statement that it was born at the grassroots, not at the boardroom. So please explain that to us.
So the idea came from an experience I had. So I was actually I was working in Himachal, and I was staying in an apple orchard, and there were a lot of bees at that time because apples were flowering. Asked the question, like, why do we have bees, here? And heard about facilitated pollination. So the fact that Himachal Pradesh actually is one of the few governments that asks beekeepers to come to Himachal during apple flowering season, and they pay the beekeepers to come because they understand the importance of bees in helping pollination for apples. So once that happened, I started, thinking about, what if we were able to do this, and what if we provided farmers, training on beekeeping, and what if we provided a market for the honey? So that was the what if. So. And that's how the model kind of came into the picture, where we actually train farmers on beekeeping. We work with only indigenous bees because what we found is that there are 100,000 types of bees, and there are only 5 bees that make honey, and there are only 2 bees that can actually be boxed, or now 3 that I know of. And those 2, out of that, the indigenous bees are more resistant. And they are more hardy, which is the same word, and found in nature. And because we wanted to work with tribal, marginal farmers, this was an easier option. And it's not migratory, so you're working on the farm with this. So you're supporting the farmer with bees.
But from that initial idea that was sparked at the apple orchard in Himachal,
Narkanda.
Did you have to go, you probably knew nothing about bees. How did you sort of take that idea and put it, execute it? And did you have to find people that you could kind of work with, etc.?
So actually when I wrote out, there was a lot of other things in play. It was not just, the bees and Narkanda experience. There was like a whole bunch of other stuff that kind of pushed me into looking at entrepreneurship. So when I wrote the first white paper, because we're all somewhat academic, one writes these papers. And so when I first wrote the white paper, it was not anything to do with bees. So when I first presented, so Neera was part of the panel where I actually had pitched the first idea of Under the Mango Tree.
Really?
So
when was this? What year?
So this was 2008. And so when I pitched, it was, so the name was already there, Under the Mango Tree.
Because the idea came to you under a mango tree?
No, it didn't. So
because you were in an apple orchard.
Yeah, so the name had come, so that's a different question if you want to ask later on. But,
I already want to ask.
But so basically it was, how do we create a market for all the products that are grown on farms to direct to consumers. So how do you do that? So that was the whole conversation. That was the pitch. But I think the biggest link was the fact that there was this pollination, bees, and honey link. But when I first pitched it to Meera and a couple of others who were on the panel, it was a whole bunch of other products, including honey to market, plus the bees for pollination angle. So that they were the ones who kind of said, let's not look at everything. This seems to be the really good theme. So focus on that. So that's how, it helped focus. And didn't know anything about bees. Went out and found people who worked with bees, and then started building. So, found another person who believed in the idea, and so she joined me, Sujana, and then we started just building the program, and got the first believers to fund you, and then that's how the steps started.
Wonderful.
Taking.
Yeah. For some of us who don't know, Dasra is the foundation known for the NGOs, NGO for the NGOs. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. No? So just to understand, how does it work, and how do you decide who to partner with?
So good question. How does it work? It's been a 26-year journey. And so Dasra has taken different shapes and forms. But to be honest, we really started Dasra to be able to support organizations and leadership like Under the Mango Tree. And we realized at first we thought, can we provide, because we started so young, we didn't actually have a whole lot of money. So it's not like we came from wealth to have a pile of cash to be able to fund organizations. We were sort of in between, like an intermediary. But I think we really focused on Dasra being a bridge. So we really felt connected to entrepreneurs, leadership, that were really trying to have social impact. And could we bring management skills was sort of where we first started, right? So could they think through how to build an organization, think of talent, some of the boring stuff that one takes for granted in the social impact space, but invests quite heavily sort of in the private sector. We thought, can we bring that kind of to the social sector? But then very quickly realized you can give all the advice and support you want, but if it doesn't come with money, then what's the point? They are still handicapped in some way. And so we said, let's start to work on where there is money, where there is wealth. And that's where we started working with companies, families, high net worth individuals, and starting to move money to these organizations. Yeah.
Wow. And I'm sure the early days were not easy. They were full of hurdles, like anything you start out on. So what was some of the big hurdles you faced, and how did you overcome them? And especially some story around this in the early days, what you didn't anticipate, because all of us, when we get into something new, are a little naive about what we're getting into. Like when we started our podcast.
Yeah, it's quite funny, right? You start sharing your war stories, and then everyone listening, especially young people, are like, oh, old people talk about their war stories. But I think we have lots of stories. I think perhaps the hardest, most difficult, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs will face this, is when you lose funding, because there's a commitment, and so you started to grow, you started feeling like things were on track, then funding never really comes through, because it also falls with the boom and bust of the economy.
Absolutely.
Right? So we lost a big chunk of our money in the 2001 dot-com bust. And we had started very much with raising a fund, wanting to support organizations. And so I think with the loss of funding comes the loss of letting go people, right? Where you've built an organization, people are coming in with you for that mission. So I think those are probably some of our hardest times. And to then pivot and say, okay, we're going to still stay true to mission, but how are you going to be able to do that without having sort of stable funding? I think that's really where you build resilience. You kind of try to make ends meet. And that's where you got to have hustle. You got to go out and continue to raise money. So I think all of that in retrospect, one takes for granted. And frankly, it never goes away. So even if you think oh, finally I've solved it, something else will happen. Yeah. And so with time comes, the ability to flow through some of the crisis and the ups and downs, and thinking about what helps one get through that is a lot of the time that we spend even with the NGOs to help them through some of that crisis is a lot of capacity building in some ways.
But Neera, obviously we've evolved very much as a society, but 26 years is your, is Dasra, since Dasra has been around. And obviously for you, it must have been like pulling teeth, because Indians historically have done philanthropy, but it's been very private. It's been, within the communities. It's all of that. So to go from that kind of an ecosystem and cultural understanding of how you want to support causes to what you guys are doing, which is much more pooled, sharing resources, coming together, not necessarily having your name emblazoned on things, all of that. How have you sort of helped to how is that mindset shifted? Because you've been a huge part and instrumental in having that, changing that mindset.
So I think the mindset doesn't just originate from us, right? I think there's also been a mindset change in the ecosystem. I mean, look at the two of you in now starting something like this would never have happened, right? 26 years ago.
Absolutely.
So you're also seeing wealth, privilege, the next generation wanting to make a difference, right? Life isn't just about accumulating wealth for a lot of people. It's also, even for middle class, to contribute. So I think there's been a shift in our society to want to give back in different shapes and forms. And some of that is coming from philanthropy being led by women. I mean, if you look at, we have a Giving Pie community. We have 400 families that are part of this giving community. About 65 to 75% of them are women-led. Now, the women may not hold the wealth or write the checks, but they're very much leading in decision-making on where that can go. And so that starts to take a different shape and form, therefore, of philanthropy. Where do they want to give? Maybe give more to gender, maybe be a lot more collaborative. They're giving to more intersectional issues like mental health. They're even looking at sports. So I think there's been a shift in who's holding wealth. There's been a shift in how families are looking at intergenerations. So look at generations who have been educated in the US, are now coming back, and it's some of these men and women in wealthy families who are leading their businesses. And as part of that, we now have a CSR law, so you're seeing also a shift in giving from the next generation that wants to be much more bold, is also much more committed to where they want to see India.
So I remember early in days you went and I think first pitched to Morgan Stanley, you're free. Yeah. And now you're going, and there's a different pivot happening, right? You are now going to families and large family offices, and that's a whole new concept. So how was that first pitch, and how is it different to pitch to families?
So it's probably the same, actually, because at the end you're pitching to individuals. I think just always remember that, even though you might be feeling like you're pitching to an institution, in front of that or behind that, wherever the positioning, are people and our relationships. So I still think it's the same to some extent. Maybe what we pitch and how we're positioning is a bit different. But what I've learned is that ability to storytell, to talk about what's happening on the ground, what is the imagination of the change that one's trying to see. You cannot underestimate how that, whether you're speaking to a foundation, a bilateral, a family, when we were pitching at Morgan Stanley, all of that actually remains the same, if not more.
So I want to take the question a little deeper. What was the reaction at Morgan Stanley, and how long does a pitch cycle last for you? Because this is something I want to know, and I'm sure our viewers want to know that how rigorous it needs to be, right? How long will it play out for? Because I'm sure something takes 3 months, sometimes can take 3 years.
Yeah, but it depends, right place, right time.
Yeah.
I mean,
timing is everything.
It is, but it is a long game. People have to play the long game. And we have seen from the first time that you meet someone, it takes 5 to 6 next follow-up meetings over the next 18 to 24 months before it converts. So you have to really stick through it, is one thing. I think to your first question, what was Morgan Stanley for me? Meeting Dick Fisher, who was the former chairman of Morgan Stanley, and I think sitting across from him and him actually really pushing both Deval and I, saying, what he enjoys the most at his point in life, and he must have been in his 60s at that time, was the philanthropy, the ability for him to have an impact, was what was his passion and what he was most motivated. And he wished, his one regret was that he started younger. And so we were little analysts, right? 23 years old. And so he said, if this is your idea, here's $250,000, do this for, each year, $50,000. Go and do it, you're young. And we were like, okay, now what do we do? Because we actually only really wanted $10,000. We were like, wow, we'll fund NGOs $1,000 each kind of thing. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, we need to do probably something more. So I think it's who you meet, who encourages you, other people's lives that you...
And I had a similar story in the sense that, when I was doing your DSI, and I know the date also.
What is DSI?
Dasra Social Impact.
Okay.
Where they kind of support entrepreneurs and enterprises and kind of coach them in to various things in making your business plan and the pitch and everything. And it's the right person, right time, right place. So January 28th, 2010. January 28, 2010. I had 25,000 rupees in the bank, and 8,000 rupees in the bank, and I had, it was just like, it was hell because I had a whole bunch of people to pay and rent. And then I met, do you remember Hemant Patel?
Yeah.
And he was in town. And
From London.
He came, and I think he had asked Dasra, like, do you know people and things?
And who was he? Was
He was a
wealthy dentist from London, right?
wealthy dentist from London.
Okay.
Who was also a beekeeper in London.
Okay.
And, I met him, and it was like, I was like, do I want to meet him? But okay, I'll go and meet him. And I met him, and then when I was telling him the story and what we are doing, and then he said, how much do you want? How much you need, not want, how much you need? And I was like, 5 lakhs. And he took out his checkbook and wrote out 5 lakhs. And I was like,
wow.
So, I think that is, it's like, and I think, and I've seen that across it's always there.
Right.
So when you're doing something good, and there's this, as a Christian one says, when God closes a window, he opens another one, whatever the word is.
Yeah.
And it's
one door closes, another one opens, right?
So it's so true. It was just, and today I'm working with a son.
So the world is, but so I want to come back to actually something we were talking about earlier. Neera talked about the importance of storytelling, whether it's into a foundation or an individual or whatever it is, and relationships. And storytelling under the mango tree, it's such an evocative name, Vijay. How did you come up with it?
So the name was there before anything.
It's always good to have a name.
So I always had the name. Yeah. So when I worked in Latur, and I went into Latur so the earthquake happened in 93, and I reached Latur in January 94. So when rubble was still around, when we were still removing dead bodies from the rubbles, though they were quite anyway. And it was completely devastated. So we worked in 12 villages. There was really no place to, have meetings. And all the people who lost their houses were living in tin sheds. And Latur is Mehrotra, which is very, very hot. Right. So you really couldn't sit in these sheds. So we ended up sitting under mango trees because that used to be the largest place for shade. And at that time, it was mango season. So if you think you came in January, by the time one started sitting and having these conversations around with the women, you could pluck a mango and continue having the conversation. So so things happen under mango trees. And the shade that the mango tree provides facilitates conversation, facilitates trade, facilitates learning. And for me, that was the big... the big thing. So the name was always there, and then
the idea came
later. Yeah.
And how did the name Dasra came in? And does it
it's
mean
not as romantic as her
but still,
story?
I don't know.
To be honest, it's
I
a
still-
Sanskrit word. So it's not Dasera, the festival. It's Dasra, which actually means enlightened giving. And
does it?
We found it in a baby naming book because my sister just gave birth, and so I was hanging at her house, and Maneka Gandhi has a book called
yes,
Baby
that's
Names,
right. Yes.
And in there was Dasra, that means enlightened giving.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
And
it's
a
quite a
rising
beautiful
sun.
story.
It's a rising sun.
Rising sun and enlightened giving. Beautiful. Lovely.
Vijay, when most people think of bees, they feel scared. You think of them, you think about getting stung. And I know in your own journey working with women beekeepers, they were scared to work with bees. But once they worked with them and realized the upside, it became a win. So what does that teach us about fear, and how do we overcome some of these ingrained notions of fear?
I think, I just went to the world, we just celebrated World Bee Day. And so we had a woman beekeeper there who was a new person who I'd never met. And she also said the same thing, that I wanted to do something with bees. I was curious, but I didn't want to do it because they would sting and they would sting, and then that's the big scare. And then the trainer gave her a bee to hold in her hand. And this is the same statement was made by another woman from another village, a different part of the country. And that, her fear, but then when she had the bee on her hand, she realized that, you have to be you have to allow that to happen. And I think that's the whole thing. That's the ability to, or the willingness to be able to take a risk. Fear, risk, it's so connected. It's the same thing. It's right. It's that, my father, one thing that my father always told me, and I tell my son as well, is that take that first step. That's the fear, right? Because once you take the first step, the fear is, you've challenged it. Because then you won't know, it's taking that first step is the fear.
Right.
And I think that's the most important thing. It's the ability to take that first step.
Yeah.
Because then you've taken more steps.
The only way is through.
Yeah, that's critical.
Right.
So I think for the young kids or for the newer generation, we should be willing to tell them to, allow them to take that first step.
Right.
I think that is the importance.
It's interesting. Courage and risk taking is also muscle.
Is a
Muscle actually is a muscle. The more you do it, the more you repeat it, the more you get to kind of do it. Otherwise, people think that investing or taking a big leap of faith or starting a venture is one time getting over fear and one time courage. But I think courage is
constant.
Constant practice in motion.
And that practice comes from thinking through what are the consequences, right? And often they're imagined consequences that if you can actually lay out taking that risk might result in X, Y, Z, then that helps you. A lot of reason can help you overcome it. It's a lot of emotion that we place actually on risk.
Look at us. We also had to face our fear, which was we didn't really want to be in front of the camera. And I kept telling Jaya, why don't we just do this as an audio thing? But, to her point, everything is visual and audio is not going to get that kind of traction.
Yes.
And so we learned to understand how to behave in front of the camera, which does not come naturally to either of us.
Yes. So I know, Neera, you work very passionately with younger girls. You have an alliance of girls and there is some kind of education that you want to provide and there's an impact you're trying to drive. So what is the larger vision here? And how do you solve for employment post-education?
So your last question, how do you solve employment post-education, is a major challenge for India, irrespective of whether for girls or boys or whomever. So I think that's a separate question to answer. I think for us, the journey of recognizing that we need to invest in girls, especially adolescent girls, in the age of 10 to 19, came from it being very underinvested, for it being quite an invisible group, right? This is the group that ends up getting married very early, having therefore early pregnancies. They drop out of school around grade 10, and so then their employability and likelihood of even agency basically diminishes. And could we therefore invest much more in a demographic? So I think what was unique at the time, which was around 15 years ago, that we started saying, let's invest in adolescent girls programs, really came from seeing that if you invested in this age group, you'll see tremendous outcomes and lift up, right? Whether it's nutrition of themselves and then their first child, which then affects maternal mortality or affects, child mortality. If you're investing in girls in this age, then they're staying in school, they're protected, they're being protected not even from their communities, but they're also being protected from, sexual reproductive health issues, menstrual hygiene. So it's a very vulnerable age. It's also the age with which we as girls, irrespective what community and background you come from, you get normed. Right? So to sum what you were saying, right? It's really sad to see girls, we are as strong in math and science in those first years.
Absolutely.
It's between grade 5 and grade 8, well, all of a sudden you opt out because you don't want to be with boys anymore and you want to you're normed into this internal dialogue and trying to justify, and society starts to play these games with us. And so we felt like investing in that age group is really important to actually start to change some of the norms. And you'd think it makes sense, right? All of us are like, no brainer, we'll invest in girls 10 to 19. It's very difficult at that time to raise money for adolescent girls. They're like, what's the point of a teenager? Anyway, she's gonna get married. I mean, men we would raise from for a giving circle would basically be, I don't understand why would we, fund teenagers at this point? Let's go younger and younger. So I think that's changed now. But
Tell me, you have a one impact story or two impact story where you invested young in these girls between 10 and 19 and you saw some shift happen at the community level or the village level. Is it a story that you were able to measure the impact of what you were doing?
yeah, so I think I just want to clarify also the work that we do, we are not in the communities ourselves,
Yes,
right?
right.
So we're working with other NGOs
Yes.
and the support that they provide. So there's tons of stories that we could say, where we've really seen a tremendous impact. But maybe I'll highlight two. I think one was where we came in more as Dasra, where we said, is there a way to bring young girls their voices, what they see that their community needs and what they need, and can you create a bridge between their needs and directly with the government? Because government has a lot of policies and schemes for young girls that never actually reach them. So we said, can we break the gatekeepers in between? And can we bring girls from different communities and bring them directly to government officials to say what are their needs and what are they looking for? And these are all kinds of things like sanitary napkins, toilets in their schools, to even safety nets, right? So another organization called Ungan that we invested in quite a lot really worked with mothers in anti-sex trafficking kind of hotspots to be able to help girls create safety nets. Like, who are the people who will protect them in their communities, right? Like, if you are going to be trafficked out, who's the first phone number that you call? So I think there are all kinds of spectrums of things that, girls we've supported in different ways. But I think for us, the biggest piece was to bring out, like, what is the challenge, what are the problems, and also connect it to more systems change, which was really to kind of bring the government in.
And Vijaya, back to you and specifically women beekeepers, I remember a story that actually I think we heard at one of the UTMT meetings of how this increased pollination improves farm income. And one of these girls ended up, and these are marginal, small farms, etc., was able to buy herself a two-wheeler scooter through the. So could you highlight sort of what the impact of UTMT working with bees has been on agricultural income?
So, I mean, we'll just focus a little bit on the women beekeepers, because I think not just from what has happened with women per se, and just it kind of builds with what Neera was also talking about, is the fact that it's not just income, it's also social empowerment. And so what we found I met Kalpana Tai just day before yesterday, who's a beekeeper from Palghar. And I was in a new village in Raigad district. And Kalpana is a single mom. She started as a beekeeper, again, scared, but the scare is also because you have to go into the forest to find the original colony. So we do what is called natural colony transfer. So we take colonies from nature and put them into a box. So she was part of that whole group. And she had never traveled from outside her village. She was a farmer, but just there. And today she's now training other women in other villages. So she has 13 villages under her.
So she's a master beekeeper.
She's actually now even better than that. She's now a junior technical trainer.
Wow.
So, technical. So they, nice names. And now she's going to be coming to Raigad also, which is like 6 hours from Palghar by bus. So, the ability to take that journey of moving from your village to another village is so strong, and the confidence that you then have, not just on the skill that you have now got, because it's a new skill, right? She's a beekeeper. She was never a beekeeper. She's been trained as a beekeeper, but she's also now transferring that knowledge to others. To other women. So she becomes a champion. She's a role model to other new women.
Leader.
And she's a champion to her own daughter. I think for me, the most critical, metric is the change in confidence, self-confidence.
Right.
I think that is the biggest change.
But there's consequences to this, which we recognized in our work with adolescent girls, is we underestimate the backlash if you don't bring husbands, brothers, mother-in-laws along. So you can't just empower a girl or work towards their empowerment, because who are we to empower them? But there's a backlash. And so we actually did a report on backlash. We recognize that, look, organizations need to invest in these individuals to see the value of actually educating a girl in your home has value for your home and for you. And so I think religious leaders, community leaders, panchayats, husbands, brothers, you have to invest in them as well.
Well, that's a good segue
absolutely.
even to, we're talking about rural India in particular and very disenfranchised people, but even in the, in urban centers and in, in professional settings and in corporate India, we see a tremendous drop-off mid-career for women for various reasons, including elder care, child care, lack of support, social support. And so, you have this crazy leaking pipeline, or maybe it's like a flooded pipeline of women dropping out of the workforce. How do we sort of mitigate some of these pressures so that women can stay the course? Because it is that, I feel like that age group between 35 and 45, which is also, again, very vulnerable in that sector.
It's the leaking pipe, or whatever the jargon.
The broken ladder.
But I think if you look at the ladder
Analogy,
example, what is really critical is not the broken ladder, but is to bring the ladder down to the next level. I mean, you have moved on, so take that ladder and give it to somebody else. I mean, I think that putting the ladder down, so that somebody else can climb.
For younger women who are coming.
So someone else can climb. But I think that is also an important
So it's something
part.
that it's something happened to me in a meditation retreat. I wanted a tagline. I know sometimes Gayatri doesn't like the word power, but it came to me, empower to empower. So I do feel women of power and influence need to give back to society and bring women who don't have the agency to bring agency to them. So you
But
just actually
why
said,
is it only women? I think part of the problem...
it's not just
just
women.
women.
And I think, so it's this whole, the cliched statement which says it takes a village. But it does take a village. It is, and I think this is, something I already shared with you earlier, is as women grow in their journey as to become leaders, and to have teams, especially when you're looking at corporate India, or you also are changing, your personal responsibilities are changing.
Right.
And you need to have that ecosystem of support.
The system needs to support
that's
us,
the point, right? Our social cultural system
it
is
cannot
not
just be the corporate.
No, it's not. It has to be the family unit. And,
It has to be
everyone talks
everybody.
about that famous story where Neera Nundy had just been elevated to be the...
And she had to go
and she had to go buy the milk.
Yeah.
And actually, I thought that was such a sad story. I didn't like that. And I got the point her mother was trying to make, like, leave your, your title outside the door. But I don't actually think that's fair. Why couldn't someone else have gone out to buy the milk? You know what I mean? So I think the point is we need to have a paradigm shift as a society. And that is another maybe 25 years worth of work or more.
But I also feel it's very, very critical is the self-confidence in the woman, because she has to be able to say, today my child needs me, tomorrow my company needs me, day after tomorrow my parents need me. And you have to be able to not feel guilty, because I think that is very, very important. Because I remember, like, when Johan wanted more time and I was building under the mango tree, I used to feel so angry at him, and then angry at, so it's that.
It's a catch-22.
Actually, Neera Nundy says this very well, that as a woman, you're in a catch-22. You are somebody who's very aspirational. If you sacrifice your career, you will be angry towards your children. And if you kind of take a very hard push on your career and somehow your children feel neglected, or not neglected, but they feel that, my mom is working all the time, she's not able to come for so they're angry at you. So it is a no-win game. And she said that children will not leave a chance when they're teenagers to drive the dagger in.
But I also feel it's like a pie chart. I mean, your whole life is a pie chart, and it's going to constantly change. And at every time of your life that it will happen.
But I think it's
You
also
don't agree?
generational, right? And I think that we also have to realize that it's quite fluid. So I think it's gone now. The language of like find balance. There's no such thing as
Yeah.
Absolutely,
balance,
no way,
right?
no
It's
way.
about 24 hours in a day, and you will emphasize different priorities at different times. But I think what we do need to do as women is recognize things that enable our emancipation, right? Like financial independence.
Absolutely.
Right?
Hey,
So
I
get a
absolutely-
freaking bank account, right? Understand that at the end of the day, if you have control of money in the household, you are and will feel empowered. And so if
Absolutely.
you are on a job and making money, I think we underestimate some of these things that give you that courage and confidence, right? So when the time comes and maybe things are not working out, you can be independent on your own. And so it has to be less about, I want to have a great career and I want my kids to love me. It's like some of these softer things, yes, but like really focus on some concrete things that give you that courage, confidence to make some difficult choices. It's all about choices
Absolutely.
at the end of the day.
Financial independence gives you freedom and choice to be with people you want to be in the family you want to be, and that is the biggest enabler. And I think at WLC we're trying to have women create more wealth.
You all have had a ringside view of, how things have changed in the 21st century in this country. We've had such a rapid, economic growth, as well as obviously it's constant churn, social churn that's happening in India. Do you feel things are better for the better today vis-a-vis what, where women are versus when you started out 3 decades ago or whatever?
Let me add to that question. Leadership has changed, right? We're using the word leadership very much today, but I don't think so. We used to use this word 3 decades back. And so how has leadership of women and Indian women changed in the last 3 decades for you? How are you seeing it play out differently?
I mean, are things better?
Yeah.
Let's just make it a big question. I would say from the vantage point of women.
I think they're different.
I knew that word was coming.
I don't think it's better. I don't think it's better, but I think it's. There's so much more knowledge out there that there's some, and also the other thing I actually wanted to talk about was that you're talking about leadership, and I saw the notes, but how do you define a leader?
Right.
I mean, is the leader only someone who is, successful with so many people behind her and doing it? Or is the leader the one who's taking actually that first step? Because she's the trailblazer. So is that a leader?
But with that definition, I think we are much better because there are many more first steps that so many more people, women, young girls and women are taking.
I think we're better off.
Right.
I don't know if we're better, because I think if you think about well-being, if you think about loneliness, if you think about what women are going through and the choices they have to make to be a leader, it may not be better in the full all-encompassed sense, but if I prioritize X, Y, Z in my own capacity, yes, I might be better off now that I have more choice, I have more influence, I have more people supporting, I have a banking system. I can't believe you couldn't get a credit card in the US before 1974. Right? So there's women. So there's systemic changes that have allowed for women to be better off. Are we better? I don't know, because some of those choices, I think, have impacted us. One can say, I think about my mother-in-law or other mother-in-laws or other mothers from other generations who believe our gendered roles were easy. Right? You knew the role you were supposed to play. You're supposed to have kids, you're supposed to look after them, and the man was going to
now you have more problems.
Yeah, and so now now you're fighting with people because you don't know what you're supposed to do and he doesn't know what he's supposed to do. I'm like, that's outrageous.
True.
Absolutely, yeah. You're so well said, yeah. And you used the word they're better. They're not better, but they're different. What would make you feel it's better? What needs to change for things to be better and not just different? What will be your measurement tool for saying things are better?
So for me, I'll tell you, for me, it's, I might be better off. But for example, at the ground level, I mean, you still have, there's women are still going through, I mean, at the home level, they're still being abandoned, even after marriage with kids. I mean, there's
There's so many structural and issues. Yeah. I mean,
there's still from a caste angle, they're not able to do something, or from a religious angle, they're not able to do something. I mean, in a village school, you will still probably have. I mean, it's difficult to find a progressive teacher who might say, allow the girl to go out and do the flag for the
hoisting,
day,
yeah.
Flag hosting on the Independence Day.
So so I mean, I think it's still there. It's not like
I'd say two things, right? I'd say two things in the Indian context, right?
Yes.
I think one, if we could change the relationship between status and women working. As
Yes.
in, if you are of a high status family and your women work, somehow that looks poorly upon you.
Right.
We have so many highly educated women. If we could just break that one piece, I would say that.
because in this country, that's a total
That's the
inverse.
problem.
It's a one,
They're like,
it's
hi, she's going out to work. Like, I put my kid Ayush into daycare when he was 6 months. There was barely daycare in those years at that time, nor was it encouraged by companies. They're like, oh my goodness, how is someone in our family sending her kid to daycare? Why can't you keep her with someone at home? You can afford the help, blah, blah. So my thing is break this one. Second,
Yes.
access to finance.
Access to money.
Make that absolutely equal to a man or anyone else. And I feel like these two things will be transformational.
And you know what you said about the leakage, right? The more privilege you have, so many families we see, me and Gayatri keep talking about, where girls went out of India, got educated, then they got married off, and the parents said, your in-laws will
don't work, yeah.
Yeah, in this country, it's an inverse relationship.
Yeah.
The more affluent, and by the way, it's not just in urban,
Exactly.
rich households, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and that's the most hardest. They have the privilege, the education, but they have just dropped it all, and it's kind of very sad to see all that money wasted, and they then lose choice and freedom in their mid-30s when their marriages are not going the way they expect it to go, and it's quite disempowering in a way. Yeah.
Actually, the focus would be, I think, like metro women, like the Bombays are, I think right now, the change probably, or at least if there was facilitation to allow women to be more empowered, would be at the tier 2 or tier 3 level villages.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing so much. But their ecosystem is not supportive enough to push that.
And they're hungry. They want to.
And
They're
so they've
hungry.
seen it.
Yeah.
They've seen it, but they've not been able to get that.
They need enablement. They need some enablement.
Yeah, and I think that they are the women who are facing the. I mean, we're not seeing it because Bombay's already gone through. I mean, the metros have gone through.
we see it. We
You
just
think?
don't accept it.
Yeah.
But I
Imagine
feel
if women at this level with that much wealth, power, and influence.
But there's wealth there also.
No, it's not
I
one
know,
or the
she-
other.
yeah,
It's
she's-
not one or the
she's
other. But I'm
saying
saying
that-
you think it's better, but it's not.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying
it's as bad. That's to Jaya's point about,
I mean, you're
people-
as trapped as a tier 2 city, but the structural challenges
Yeah.
are much more in these other
In the
cities.
tier two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and very privileged women feel very trapped if they don't have financial freedom. While the family could be wealthy, but they don't feel financial freedom. They feel very
So
Oh,
like
yeah,
kitty,
every day.
I don't know those women.
So like kitty parties, I had no idea the whole concept of kitty parties, but that's all about women having flexible money.
Yeah, because one person gets that pool
Yeah.
for the month.
And so I joined a kitty party. They was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. All the moms are hanging out, so I should also do that. They're like, no, they're doing it because of this. I was like, oh, this is the problem.
You live in a very dichotomous world, right? We are all drinking Starbucks coffee while you enable farmers to earn 50,000 rupees a month.
Oh, yeah, asking me.
Yeah, and both of you, this is a question. You work at a very grassroots level where people are barely making ends meet, and then we cut to India, driving our big cars, having Starbucks coffee without thinking. How do you kind of make sense of this and make peace with this, with your own privilege, while working in a place where your one thing that you buy can buy you so much, and whereas your farmers are only earning 50,000 rupees a year? I feel kind of very hard to make sense of this myself.
I made peace with it long ago.
How? How and what?
I mean, so like when I was in Latur, I shared this with you already, but when I was in Latur, I used to work really hard for with the women. I would live in one of those tin sheds, and then I would take the train and come back to Colaba and go swimming at the Bombay gym and have my beer, and then go back again Sunday night to live a life of working with widows. So it was really tough, It was really tough. It was like, and I think one went through this whole thing that, just because you're working in rural development, you had to wear jola, khadi, you had to, go in second class.
Look and behave
all
the
of
part.
those,
Yeah.
the whole things. And I think, so that was I wrote a whole piece about being hypercritical and hypothetical, and I had two lives, and all of that. But I just feel like for me, what happened in the end was that I knew what I was doing. I knew that someone had to do it, and I knew that I was professionally qualified to do it, and so that was how I came to terms with it. And I also came to terms with the fact that I also needed to live my life and my lifestyle and had to be paid for it. So it's not necessary just because you are working in development where that you have to be, paid pittance.
Right.
And
also be impoverished. Right.
And that has changed, though, in some sense. In the early days, when you worked in an NGO, you also were paid pittance.
Right.
Yes.
And
I think
that has
changed with
That
Bill
has
Gates
changed.
Foundation. They hired a lot of McKinsey, ex-McKinsey, and paid them
But
decent
people
amount of
still
money.
don't allow. even donors still
Don't like, yeah.
don't like.
They don't like admin costs to be too
more
high.
than 10%.
Yeah, right.
That's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not fair, because you're working with the
With experts,
with the real,
Yeah.
like the people.
And
who
like it
really
or
need to
not,
change.
money is the motivation in any sector. Yeah.
I don't think it's a dichotomy as much as it's going back to where we started this conversation around kind of belonging and identity. At least for myself, it's a responsibility that it's not an us and them, and that if you come from a certain amount of privilege, isn't it a wonderful opportunity to be able to use that for good, right? So it's less the dichotomy as much as it is a responsibility, but it's also, there's so much more of this blurring happening, right? The future for people who will be successful will be those who can cross these boundaries. Can you sit in a boardroom, and can you go and sit in a village and communicate and engage and connect with different kinds of people are the kinds of leaders that we need in this country.
Right.
It's not
I love
simply
it.
boardroom people.
Absolutely.
Or
I think what you said is
elsewhere.
so beautiful.
And it comes back to her point about storytelling. To be able to forge those relationships and be able to navigate all these different contradictions because India is basically a jumble of contradictions.
And totally going on contrary, that the problem that our movie industry is facing, that very first world people are writing stories where they're saying the whole world is at the grassroots and we need storytellers from third and second tier town. And that's a problem of that industry, that you can't have people in privilege writing storytelling for the whole of 1.4 billion Indians. Yeah, they're not relatable.
No, but it's also, what is also important, because I just realized this, is that in the early days, you had a lot of and it goes to the same thing they're talking about films, where you had a lot of donors who would come and, develop the program, and donors like the bank as well, that you will develop the program because you think this is what they need. Right? And then in the 80s and 90s, this all shifted into what is called community-based development, right? So then everybody started saying, but because things were not working, and the government would come up and say, oh, yeah, check dam bana do, and the check dam would be built. And then after 4 years, the check dam would be broken, because they never really thought, this is the right place for the check dam. This is how the check dam has to be managed, all of that. So they never looked at that. And that has changed, where people are saying, what does the community want? Where is the right place to put the check dam? Because it doesn't flood here. It floods here. Put the check dam here. Those kind of things. So taking the community with you in planning, that has become important now. And so you now have communities that are building plans. So it's going from the grassroots up.
Right.
So it's not being top down. And I think that's the same thing. It's like your, the first word.
Reality check, yeah.
I'd like to end by asking you one powerful lesson that you could share with us that you've learned through your career journey. Neera, let's start with you.
Oh gosh. I think it would be find things that give you kind of resilience or make you stronger. And it's not just dependent on yourself. So whether it's people, whether it's circumstances, I think to be able to pinpoint that, what it might be, and listen to that. And my second thing was, don't always listen to your own voice.
I also had two. So one was be shameless.
Lovely.
Just be shameless. I mean, I think that's the thing. You have to just be, shameless. Knock as many doors as you can. Ask for help when you need it. Be shameless. And the second one for me is, which is what I'm doing, is put joy as your metric, because I think that's important. Because once you know that you don't feel joy, then you need to relook at it.
Beautiful. I like that. Yeah.
Jaya?
Yeah. I think for me, the most powerful lesson has been, I think, asking for help. I think a lot of time women kind of just cave into saying, I have to do this alone. And I think what's really changed is I shamelessly ask for help, and I'm very okay to be a little vulnerable. Like I said today, I'm very exhausted and I told Gayatri, I think I would have left you alone today. But like to be that honest in my conversation with people where I'm at.
Yeah. I think for me, it would be adaptability. I function in an industry that is rapidly transforming. And of course, the world as we know it is just changing at too rapid a clip. So I think adaptability would be very, very important.
Okay. So I'm going to change the question. My question. I'm going to ask you one strong moment of pivot. Like in your life, one moment of pivot in your life. We go to create impact, but the impact transforms us first. All what you were trying to do was create impact and change. You're change makers, right? But the change that you're trying to do first changes you. In what way?
I see. So I would say the biggest moment for me was when I did my summer with Seva, and I went into the communities and I saw women in the communities in these self-help groups, and the circumstances that they have and the leadership that they have was transformational for me. I was like, look at these women in the community and how strong they are, and what are we complaining about? I think that was pivotal for me.
I was actually thinking, because so one of the things that really, I don't know if it was a pivotal moment, but it really helped me understand development better, was that, when I was in Latur, I gave out loans. And I gave out loans to women and this is when income generation, or what we called SHGs, were first coming out. So there was even no real concept of SHGs at that time. And we gave out loans, and women bought chickens. So we gave and these were women who were, widowed and had no idea. And so, but they all wanted chickens, so we gave them chickens. And then suddenly, me and my team were being called home for people's houses for dinner.
Chicken curry.
For chicken curry. So all our chicken loans went into
eating.
Into default. And a total default, right? So that whole experience actually taught us about that we had to kind of think a little bit more about, because we just gave out the loans. We never really talked to them about savings and
due diligence is what the bankers would call it.
Governance, and this whole thing about the fact that you're getting an asset which has to be taken care of and
maybe multiplied, not destroyed.
So that was a big
not eat it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Not eat your loan up.
So yeah, not that it was a pivotal, but it kind of made, set things in place about how development needs to also be somewhat structured.
Yeah, right. More process-oriented approach.
It's not just giving out. Handouts. It's not just handouts. I think that's the right word. It's not just a handout. And then as an implementer, you are then, you're also, accountable.
Tracking, yes, exactly.
You're accountable because somebody else. Because, that person has given you the
So
money.
process and accountability.
Yeah.
If today's conversation moved you, inspired you, or made you see something in a new light, don't keep it to yourself.
Share it. Follow us on Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's grow this circle together. One story, one spark, one woman at a time.
Until next time, stay bold, stay brilliant, and remember, when women rise, the world rises with us.